Arkansas is 1-0 after a 7-point win over a ranked Cincinnati team and will now jump into SEC play this weekend. I'm Andrew Hutchinson, the managing editor at bestofarkansassports.com. And to help you get ready for the matchup with South Carolina, I reached out to someone who does a great job of covering the Gamecocks for a living. Collyn Taylor is a writer at Gamecock Central, the South Carolina site in the On3 network. And he was kind enough to spend some time with us today. We appreciate it, Collyn. Hope you're doing well.
Yeah, doing great. It's that time of year where you get to talk ball pretty much nonstop. So I'm looking forward to it.
I know we're going to talk plenty about this Saturday's game, but I wanted to kind of start our conversation with Shane Beamer and the job he's done there at South Carolina. To me, it seems kind of similar to Sam Pittman in that he wasn't an offensive or defensive coordinator, but got hired, far exceeded expectations in year one. How has he turned that program around, and what are maybe the expectations now as we enter year two?
Yeah, I mean, Shane's really delved into the kind of one of us mentality of this fan base, and South Carolina, it's a very insular community. It's a very tight knit group of people from across the state, and Shane was born in Charleston. Obviously, coached at South Carolina during the heyday, the Spurrier years. This was his quote unquote dream job, and a lot of coaches say that, but I feel like that's at minimum partially true for Shane Beamer. He always wanted to get back to South Carolina, and I think that enthusiasm's kind of permeated the fan base. They can kind of sense that he wants to be here, and for as much as Will Muschamp did good early in his tenure, the culture really deteriorated towards the end, and Shane's done a really good job of building that back up and getting some talent in. They have some really talented players, Spencer Rattler being the first and foremost, but you have an Austin Stogner, you have a Jaheim Bell, a Marshawn Lloyd, a Juice Wells. They've really used the transfer portal well. And so there's a lot of enthusiasm and excitement about this season, this team in the future, just because of kind of a little bit of everything, the talent they've been able to bring in and the culture and the enthusiasm they feel from the program, from the staff itself.
I know there's lots of connections with this game. I mean, Shane Beamer worked with Sam Pittman at Georgia. Jaden Hazelwood here at Arkansas, of course, played with Spencer Rattler and Austin Stogner at Oklahoma. But I wanted to specifically kind of get your thoughts on former Arkansas assistant Justin Stepp and just kind of the job he's done so far in his home state, because he was a guy that was pretty well liked by Arkansas fans.
He's done a fantastic job. And I mean, he did a great job at Arkansas. People saw that. I think South Carolina was probably one of the few jobs he would leave for to take a quote unquote lateral position in terms of just being a position coach, just because he is from the area. He grew up in Pillion, which is about, I would say, an hour outside of Columbia, grew up going to these games, and he's done a really good job. I mean, the room he inherited was razor thin in terms of depth, in terms of talent, and he's done a decent job squeezing some talent out of that and going to the portal and getting a Corey Rucker, a Juice Wells, some really talented pieces there, while recruiting the Texas area, which he's done at Arkansas, which he's done at SMU. So he's done a really good job. The fan base loves him, and I think that he's one of those guys that I don't think he's going to be at South Carolina for very long, and that's not a disrespect to him. I just think that he's destined to be an offensive coordinator and even a head coach probably at some point during his career.
Now let's kind of dive into this personnel. I mean, you mentioned it earlier. One of the biggest portal additions in the SEC, maybe even in the country, was Spencer Rattler going from Oklahoma to South Carolina. He's got one game under his belt. I'm curious maybe how you would assess his first outing and maybe some areas that maybe he probably wants to improve on moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, in reality, I think there's only one throw. When you look back at his outing, I think he dropped back 42 times and only had one throw that he really wished he had back, and it was a 3rd and 2 where he was rolling out and he could have checked it down to a back or run for the first down, but tries to force it and throws a pick. But other than that, I think he played a really solid game. Had a few dots, created some explosive plays, moved around in the pocket and extended plays, but it's hard to evaluate because South Carolina's offensive line and protection just did not do well. They gave up, I think, a pressure on almost 39% of dropbacks, which is terrible. So it's kind of a weird thing of he showed some flashes, but it's really hard to evaluate at times because there were points where he just didn't have enough time to throw, didn't have enough time to do what the play was designed to do. And so I think you'll see a better Spencer Rattler as the season goes along and they kind of gel. But he showed he showed why he was a 5-star talent and a preseason Heisman favorite a couple years ago, in that little short sample size.
You mentioned it there. I saw some tweets about some players kind of defending the offensive line, and I think Rattler was one of them. Fans can sometimes overreact, but I'm wondering, what was your take on that offensive line? Was it just one bad game, or is there maybe some legitimate concerns there, and that could be something Arkansas exploits this Saturday?
Yeah, I think there are legitimate concerns, and it was a group that underperformed last year, given the talent, given the experience, and it was the big question of, can they returned all 5 guys that struggled last year? Can they take another step? And through one game, they really struggled. So it's a group that you can exploit at times. I'll be interested to see. Georgia State was more of a smaller, quicker line, and this Arkansas defensive line's a bunch of big bruisers that can get to the backfield and move well. So we'll be interested to see how they transition to playing a different style of defensive line. But it's a concern, and they didn't block well. The receivers didn't block well in the run game, and that's something that's, if South Carolina wants to be a good offense and show some progress, they're going to have to really get better at. And it starts against Arkansas this week.
And the last thing I wanted to ask about the offense is just kind of how it's changed maybe with Spencer Rattler from last year to this year. I know the offensive coordinator is still the same, but has the offensive philosophy maybe shifted with a guy like Rattler at quarterback?
They're going to try to push the ball a little bit more down the field. Just they didn't have the guy with arm talent last year. They were. I joke that their starting quarterback, they pulled him out of the GA room. He was on the pizza and beer diet until about 3 weeks before the opening game, and they just didn't have a guy with the arm talent that can push the ball and put it in tight windows. So I think you'll see more of that, a vertical passing attack. I think you'll see more rollouts, sprint outs, moving the pocket and shifting it. Number one, the offensive line's struggled, but number two, you have a quarterback athletic enough to get out of the pocket and make some plays. And that's kind of where the biggest shift I've seen through the first week of the season has come. But it's still going to be pro style. They're still going to get under center and run the ball and try to get the ball into space and let playmakers go to work. But you're going to see a more vertical passing attack and a little bit more movement out of the pocket than what you probably saw last year.
And now moving over to the defensive side of the ball, I've been reading up on him. And it sounds like this Cam Smith guy is the real deal. I've seen him being discussed as a first-round pick and one of the top corners in the country. But I've also read, I think he's moved to nickel. Is that right? And
Yeah.
how's he doing there? And what kind of a weapon is he for that South Carolina defense?
He's a big one. Cam's, if you had told me 2 or 3 years ago he'd be in the conversation to be a top 30 pick in the NFL draft, I probably would have shaken my head and said no way. But he was a guy that came in highly ranked in the recruiting rankings, struggled to put on weight, but has really thrived in this new system. Has put on the weight and it's kept it. Strong physical tackler, really good in coverage. And they can move him around. If they don't want to put him at nickel, they can shift into the boundary. And he played really well there last year. And so he's a versatile piece. They can play him in a lot of different roles. And he's not afraid to stick his face mask in there and stop the run game as well. It's easier said than done against a really good power running attack from Arkansas. But he's going to try to do his best. And he's a really, really, really good weapon for South Carolina.
And of course, if we're going to talk about a team coached by a Beamer, I feel like we've got to talk about special teams, especially after what South Carolina did last week. I'm wondering if last week's performance surprised you at all, special teams wise, or did you kind of see this coming based on what they did last year? And is special teams as big of a deal to Shane as it was his dad over at Virginia Tech?
Yes, I think one of the highest paid assistants on the staff is their special teams coordinator. Like, if that says anything about it, like that's it. Did I think that they were going to do some wonky special team stuff in the opener? Absolutely, but I don't think anybody could have predicted 2 blocked punts for a touchdown, for touchdowns, a fake field goal to set up the first offensive touchdown, an 80-yard punt, nearly 80-yard punt. And they went for 2 twice, which is, quote unquote special teams, but they really lean into it. And Shane Beamer talked about it this week, is the goal is to try and steal possessions, to make sure that whether it's a blocked punt or a fake field goal or something along those lines, it gives you extra plays offensively and more chances to score touchdowns instead of field goals. And it helps in the return game. So they really emphasize a lot of that because if you're a threat to block a punt every single time down there, you got to either keep more guys in or hold blocks longer, and that frees up your return man to get 15 extra yards on a return or 10 extra yards on a return, which can help an offense. So they emphasize it a lot. I would expect to see some special teams voodoo this weekend, just trying to get some stuff, generate some stuff against a really talented Arkansas team. And it's going to be the staple forever and ever. I mean, that it's not Beamer Ball. They call it Beamer Ball 2.0, and they've really kind of leaned into it.
And last thing I got for you is you don't necessarily maybe have to give a prediction here, score prediction, but I'm curious if you maybe have a couple of keys that you're going to be really keeping an eye on Saturday, and kind of how do you see this game playing out on Saturday?
Yeah, if you're South Carolina, you got to get to Jefferson. I mean, that dude can hurt you in so many different ways, and this is a pass rush that lost two of its more veteran pieces to graduation and the draft. So you got to get to him. You have to make him feel uncomfortable, and that'll help out your secondary against these playmakers. And that's one of those things you just got to do. And if you're South Carolina, you got to run the ball. That frees up your vertical passing attack. And if you can't move the ball, it's going to be hard to score. And they struggled at times to really move the ball against Georgia State. And I just don't know if South Carolina has the manpower right now to beat a really, really talented Arkansas team. I could see it being close for a little bit and Arkansas maybe pulling away late, but I just think Arkansas, they're probably, I mean, they are a year ahead of what South Carolina is right now. And I think that you're going to see an Arkansas team that understands its identity. And South Carolina is just, I don't know if they go on the road and can do that. If it's at Williams-Brice, maybe a different story, but on the road against that team, I think it's going to be hard to come out with the win.
Well, I appreciate it, Collyn. Thanks again for doing this. And I know Arkansas fans are really looking forward to the matchup, getting started with SEC play. I've already seen a few South Carolina fans on social media that are making the trip, and I know you said you were going to as well. So I hope you have safe travels, everything goes smoothly. And then, of course, as a reminder to everyone watching this, if you want to watch the game, it's going to be on ESPN with kickoff at 11 a.m. Central.